These peaceful, windswept fields in North Yorkshire hide a dark and bloody past. In one day on this ground, up to 28,000 men died in the most brutal of battles. This was not a scene of wholesale destruction caused by bombs and machine guns. This was a medieval slogfest, men hacking away at each other, arrow, axe and blade. This was the greatest loss of life in a single day in English history. This is Towton.
The Battle of Towton doesn't have a direct connection to Richard III as such. He wasn't here. In fact, he was only 8 years old when this battle took place. But nevertheless, the events that took place on these fields on March the 29th, 1461, shaped his life like nothing else. It shaped nearly everyone's life.
It's just impossible to convey with words the magnitude of what took place here. No other battle in English history comes close to the scale and horror of Towton.
The Battle of Towton, like all battles in the Wars of the Roses, was a battle between the houses of York and Lancaster. Henry VI, the Lancastrian king, had named Richard, Duke of York, and his offspring as his heirs. His wife Margaret had other ideas though. She raised an army, defeated the Yorkists at St Albans, captured her hapless husband Henry, and retired to the city of York. However, now her adversary had changed.
In a prelude to Towton, Richard, Duke of York, had been ambushed and killed at Wakefield. This left a new man in charge of the Yorkist cause. 6'3" tall, young, handsome and daring, the Duke's 19-year-old son Edward was a different enemy altogether.
The old Duke was awkward, politically uncertain, and his military accomplishments were a bit of a mixed bag. Young Edward, on the other hand, was decisive, inspiring, and full of teenage bravado. The Lancastrians took their position along that northern ridge. One of Edward's armies hadn't turned up yet, so the Lancastrians had huge superiority of numbers, but the width of the field stopped them from outflanking the Yorkists.
Then the wind blew. It blew from the south. Then the snow and sleet fell, blown right into the faces of the Lancastrians. Then the arrows came. Shooting with the breeze, Edward's men landed volleys of arrows deep in the ranks of their enemy. The Lancastrians tried to fire back, but shooting into the wind saw their arrows fall short. They had no choice but to advance.
The battle raged on for hours with no clear advantage. Then, just as the Lancastrians' superior numbers were starting to tell, the missing Yorkist army appeared over that ridge there. It was Norfolk's men joining the fight. The Lancastrians kept fighting, but the tide had turned. They started fleeing the field, with the Yorkists pursuing them and mowing them down from behind.
The River Beck claimed countless lives. Men struggling in the water were trampled down by their comrades fleeing after them. Bodies piled up, with still more men climbing over bridges of corpses. Few escaped.
Towton was the largest and bloodiest day in English history. Some estimate that 1% of the entire population of the nation died on these fields at Towton. Edward's claim to the throne was left unassailable, and Richard's future as the new king's youngest brother was sealed. War is hideous. I hate it. I can't stop putting myself in the position of those men dying, the horror that they experienced, sacrificing their lives for some human ruler that cared little for them. But what happened here is so monumental, it's so huge, that I couldn't just drive past and ignore this place. I had to visit here and at least pay my respects to the men that gave their lives here, that sacrificed their precious lives for a cause that few still care about.
But it's time to leave battlefields for the time being. Towton is just 13 miles from a city that was Richard's city like no other in the 15th century. York is Richard's city, and they're proud of their Ricardian roots. This was a technological marvel in Richard's day. Taking over 240 years to finish, York Minster was completed when Richard was 20 years old. Richard visited the Minster numerous times and bestowed the church with fabulous gifts. There is still a campaign to have Richard's remains removed from Leicester and reinterred here. The Yorkshire Museum illustrates how fabulous the lifestyle was for the nobility of Richard's day. On display is the astonishingly beautiful Middleham jewel, found in 1985 by prospectors. This pendant, adorned with a 10-carat blue sapphire, originally held tiny portions of silk embroidered with gold thread. Rumour has it that it once belonged to Richard's mother, Cecily Neville. Also on display at the Yorkshire Museum is the Stillingfleet Boar Badge. These badges were used to decorate the dress of Richard's followers. This excellent example, found about 8 miles south of York, displays Richard's brand in great and embarrassing detail. The Richard III experience at Monk Bar contains educational displays on the Wars of the Roses. And if you're in the mood, there's the Henry VII experience at Micklegate Bar as well.
York is a wonderful city full of charm and character. Its period architecture takes you back to Richard's day in happier times.
I'd love to sit around York for hours and soak up the atmosphere. York is where Richard lived and worked, and he was loved by the people of York in return. And during his life in Yorkshire, this was the centre of Richard's world.
I've longed to come here for nearly 30 years. This is the one place that Richard thought of as home more than any place else.
When Richard's father died in 1460, he and his older brother George were brought here to be raised in the care of Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick.
Richard undoubtedly had some of the happiest moments of his life here at Middleham. He spent 3 to 4 years here as a young boy and carried away from his time here some relationships that would last a lifetime, including his loyal friend Francis Lovell and the love of his life, Anne Neville.
The story of Richard and Anne is legendary. They spent years growing up here together, only to be separated when Richard's official duty came calling. Anne was even married off to Richard's sworn enemy when her father defected to the Lancastrian cause in 1470.
Evidently, Richard never gave up on his ambition of marrying Anne, but when her husband died just 5 months into their marriage, it was Richard's brother George that pounced. He was married to Anne's sister and wanted to secure their vast inheritance for himself.
One story describes George disguising Anne as a servant and hiding her from Richard in a London cookshop. But Richard wouldn't be dissuaded. Here we see the singleness of mind and determination of the young man Richard, and also his integrity. He found her, agreed to forego her inheritance just to get her, and in early 1472 the couple were married. And this is where they set up their home, returning to the scene of their childhood together.
There are those that ascribe less than noble motives to Richard in his pursuing Anne for marriage, but I think all of that is a major stretching of the facts. It speaks volumes that when they were married, they actually chose to live here, the place where they met and grew up together. And when their son was born in December 1473, they presented the picture of a perfectly happy family for the next 10 years. It brings a nice warm feeling to think that Richard really had some happy moments at this place. You think of the image of the busy lord coming home at the end of the day to his childhood sweetheart and his little son, and it really does warm the heart. I'm so glad for him that in his turbulent life he really had some happy times here.
So many stories of Richard end at Bosworth for obvious reasons, but I'm glad I've retraced his steps in reverse order. Middleham leaves a smile on the face, a vision of happier times for the man, of a place and time where he was respected and loved, and found something of a normal life in his chaotic world. Yet so many questions remain about the man himself. Who really was Richard? How can we reconcile the two views of him, man of devotion and loyalty, or ruthless and cruel despot? And why does this man touch people so intensely centuries after his death?